Hi, class. My name is Eloise Ramirez. I am going to try to do this a little bit faster. It cut me off on my first attempt. Um, so, the issue that I will be discussing is poverty and some of the impacts that poverty has on families. So, the issue poverty is a huge issue in the United States. There are many children and families that are living in poverty, and millions of children and families that are living below the poverty line. A poverty line, poverty limit, or a poverty threshold is the minimum level of income that is deemed enough or necessary for a country, and this is set by the United States government. A poverty threshold is used to indicate the least amount of income a person or a family needs to meet their basic needs. Individuals are considered poor if that income falls below that specified threshold or a specified amount. Um, I can't provide the numbers of the poverty threshold for the year 2018 because this varies on the size of the family unit, families with children, elderly. So it's difficult to provide those values, but they can be searched and viewed through the United States Census Bureau or the Research Institute on Poverty and other various government websites. So poverty is a social problem. Many children and families are affected by living in poverty, which affects the way the family systems function. Uh, Poverty affects growth, development, and the health of children. Um, According to Wood 2003, poverty is described as an economic state that does not allow for the provisions of basic family and child needs, such as adequate food, clothing, and housing. Um, Poverty is defined as an economic state which does not allow for the basic family and child needs, overall basic needs being met. Income poverty is the condition of not having enough income to meet one's basic necessities, and children are often the most at risk because children are dependent on others. They're dependent on their families, on their parents, or other adult caretakers to provide for them financially. Um, so poverty is described as a condition of misery, hopelessness, and dependency, and that's according to Wood. As a result of poverty, the family is affected in many areas. So if we can't buy food, then our nutrition and development is going to be affected. If we don't have enough money for shelter, then moving around from place to place or going to shelters or living in multiple houses, that's going to be affected. And that's going to affect development, educational needs, mental health concerns. Just the basic needs aren't being met. It's going to be an array of factors that are going to be associated with poverty. Um, so here, the National Center for Children in Poverty in 2012 defines poverty as an economic hardship. There are 3 levels of economic hardship according to the National Center for Children in Poverty 2012. There's extreme poverty, which is less than 50% of the federal poverty level or the federal poverty threshold. There is poverty, which is less than 100% of the federal poverty level. And then there's low income, which is less than 200% of the federal poverty level. Again, the poverty level or threshold is going to vary based on age, income, family household, multiple families, so families with 3 or 4 kids. But for example, in 2016, and this is also coming from the National Center for Children in Poverty 2012, the poverty threshold for a family of 4 with 2 children, that income limit is $24,339. So a family of 4 with kids has to be at that income limit to be considered poor. But in reality, when you think about all the actual family expenses, emergencies, that amount is going to vary greatly in order to just make the basic ends meet for a family of 4 with 2 children. And they should actually be at a poverty threshold of 48,678 just to be able to meet the basic needs. So when we're looking at children and families where parents are either single-parent households or two-parent households, employed with minimum wage jobs or working several minimum wage jobs or just one person working, we can see that the issue of poverty is a real concern. I mean, for a family of four, they should be making at least $50,000 a year just to meet basic needs. And even then, that's considered, the minimum threshold. So we can see that poverty level income is just not enough to support a family. Research suggests that on average, a family needs an income equal to about 2 times more than what the federal poverty threshold minimum is in order to just meet the basic needs. And again, this is coming off the National Center for Children in Poverty. There's a lot of data on there, so I wasn't able to include it in the slides for the purpose of just time and the PowerPoint presentation. So poverty for children and families obviously is a concern in America. I mean, it's a concern nationwide, worldwide, but I'm speaking of just here in the United States. In recent years, 1 in 5 American children, so 12 to 14 million, have lived in families in which income has failed to exceed the poverty threshold. Another 1/5 of American children have lived in families whose incomes were no more than twice the poverty threshold. There are almost 24 million children under age 6 in the U.S. and large numbers of young children growing up in families experiencing economic hardships. There are almost half, so 11.4 million children that live in low income or poor families. That's nearly 3 million children and families that are living in extreme poverty. There's a slide here that shows and this is back in 2010, so since this time it's definitely increased and doubled, and it seems to be increasing and doubling every year. But looking at this chart, you can see that 12% back in 2010, 12% of families and children were living at extreme poverty levels. 13% were living in poverty. 23% were low income. Right here, this green one is low income families. And then this little area right here where we're above low income. I'll get to the risk factors here, but going back to just the how many people are affected by this issue, it's a lot. It really is a lot. I mean, 12 to 14 million American families living in poverty. In 2012, that doubled to 24 million with families living in poverty with children under the age of 6. In 2017, the United States Census Bureau shows that 40 million people, so again, doubling again, 40 million people are living in poverty levels in the United States. There's a 40-page report on poverty for the U.S. Based on the United States Census Bureau. So they have a lot of information there as far as most current level of poverty, and again, it seems to definitely be increasing. Some of the risk factors for the population of poverty include non-English speaking families. So if you're limited in English, in the English language, it's difficult for employment purposes. Risk factors of single parent households. There's risk factors of just large households with multiple children in 2-parent households or single households, limited education for parents. Even with a bachelor's degree, according to the United States Census Bureau, these individuals are still at a poverty level. Other risk factors include teen parents, lack of employment, disabilities. So the populations are being affected, and not only for children and families, but elderly individuals and people with disabilities. So definitely large population is being affected for poverty. And here is a bar graph that shows the large families. You can see single parent households are the most higher risk for experiencing multiple risk factors of poverty. So going to the history of poverty, so going back to the 1800s, poverty was an issue then, but in smaller numbers. Even going back to the Stone Age days, poverty was an issue. I mean, cavemen had to hunt their own food. There wasn't any money. They had to find ways to survive in whatever elements, as there wasn't any money coming in. Then we move over to civilization. Post World War II, there was an estimated, post World War II, there was just extreme levels of poverty. There was high mortality rates of death due to living in poverty or epidemic diseases because of living in poverty. Then, moving forward, agriculture started becoming popular. So with the agriculture, there's population growth, which, there's an explosion in populations, there are large numbers of families in the households. There was, the lower class versus the higher class, the rich versus poor. In the 19th century, acts of parliament laws were passed to address the issue of poverty. Here's a couple of videos of just, post-World War. This one is not very long. It's probably I think a 5-minute video. This one's a little bit longer. It's a 20-minute video. This talks about the history of poverty from the Stone Age till now. Going back to the laws that impact poverty. So in the 19th century, poverty was a big concern. So there was legislation or bills, Elizabethan poor laws that were created and administered through parish that provided help and relief for elderly, orphans, unemployed, sick people. Poor houses were established. There was, poor farms and workhouses. So poor farms for people who just couldn't work, were disabled, they were poor. Then there were workhouses, which they would give you what you needed if you worked for them. Then there were the outdoor relief programs. So there was public assistance to the poor for absolute necessities, but people were able to stay in their own home. They didn't live in workhouses. They stayed in their own home. So that's kind of where the social work part comes in, where public assistance was being provided to families, but they didn't have to, work in different conditions. They were able to just stay home with their families, and necessities were being provided to them. So as far as interventions at the micro level, we would look at families and assess their finances, their bills, their sources of incomes, other means of financial support the family is receiving. At the macro level, families with two incomes, they're still experiencing poverty and they can't qualify for public assistance, even though they're at the poverty level. So at the macro level, maybe increasing the poverty threshold based on that family size and income to consider family expenses. That's more of a government policy since they set the threshold. But as I mentioned earlier, families, in order just to receive and make ends meet, they need to be making at least $50,000 for a family of 4 with 2 kids, so a total of 6 families, to be able to meet their basic needs. So maybe increasing the level of poverty threshold. At the meso level, we'll be offering solutions and interventions to connect families to other resources, the local food banks, churches that can provide vouchers for gas or rent assistance, food assistance, reaching out to children's schools. There's food programs that there's a free and reduced lunch. There's also programs where kids can take food boxes home or food bags home. Sometimes schools offer vouchers for clothes, and they offer basic hygiene and clothing for children and families. So there's a lot of interventions at the meso level that can help for families in poverty. As far as evidence-based practice interventions, there's 2 programs that have worked really well. There's Nurse Family Partnership, which is a visitation program for first-time mothers up until the children are 2 years of age. They provide resources for family stability, help with reducing poor health in children, teaching parenting skills. Another evidence-based practice is WIC, very popular program that goes from pregnancy through age 5, and that targets low income and nutritionally at-risk families, and it provides resources as well. So basically, in summary, many families are living at the poverty ratio, the poverty threshold. I think there just needs to be an increase in the poverty threshold to be able to make ends meet. You have to be considered based on the numbers of the poverty threshold, I mean, you have to be considered really poor to be able to apply for public assistance. And I think that threshold needs to be probably increased a little bit more to be able to have